Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's ForSpace, and thank you for joining us for today's event, Creative Possibilities and Generative Potentials, AI, and the Artist, with David Rokeby. This is co-presented with the Applied AI Institute and the Electra International Digital Art Festival. And just to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from ForSpace, and we are located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. At ForSpace, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge, co-creating daily activities that examine, research, questions, projects, things happening across the university. And we're running today's event, of course, as a live stream Zoom meeting. Those of you joining us there, if you have any comments or questions, we'll have a Q&A later on. Just pop those into the chat. Those of you here in the space, we're going to do a little, they're going to be more of an expanded Q&A, and you'll learn a bit about that later on. But we'll be bringing some microphones around so other people can hear as well. Okay. Now, just to help introduce things, it's my pleasure to pass the microphone over to the co-director of the Applied AI Institute, Fenwick McKelvey. And Fenwick, I'm just going to give you my mic right here.
Bonjour tout le monde, je suis Fenwick McKelvey, je suis co-directeur de l'Institut d'IA et c'est mon grand plaisir à faire une félicitation et merci pour venir ici, ça c'est mon mot français, mais c'est une très bonne opportunité pour nous à l'Institut à inviter David Rokeby, merci beaucoup, pour discuter les intersections de l'art et IA. C'est très important pour nous parce que nous sommes un institut interdisciplinaire. Nous sommes les membres d'ingénieurs, mais aussi les membres dans l'art. Et ça, c'est une très importante facette de notre travail à distribuer les opportunités et les discussions sur IA dehors seulement les discussions seulement techniques. Et ça, c'est très important, l'intersection entre les arts et les IA ici. So, to continue, I just want to say how exciting it is to be here today and to say that one of the things that we're so interested in encouraging, this is through some of the work and collaboration with the Milieu Institute, with Generative AI Studio. Many of the participants have been here from last year in MUTEC, as well as our work more broadly around thinking about better images of AI, is trying to think about how this discussion about artificial intelligence is not something solely technical, but that brings in, and so I'm so happy to see so many people here today. I just want to say two quick last words. One is a brief announcement. We're working on our first annual report for the AI Institute, and we'd like to encourage artists and creators at Concordia who might like their art featured in the report to please reach out and consider. We have a call for submissions. If there's work that you've created you think would make and jazz up and make a report more beautiful, which I'm sure it would, please let us know. If we can use your art, we will, and we'll license it fairly using rates from the industry. The second thing to say is that we are really grateful for all the collaborators that have been here today. Especially, I just want to say a big thank you to Lan and Lynn, who helped encourage us to do this. And a big thank you, as always, to Lindsay Rogers, our knowledge mobilization advisor, who, if you haven't checked it out, really see the work that she's been able to leverage here. I feel like this is really a tremendous example of our commitment to doing interdisciplinary work, is the type of events, whether it's in AI or humor, some of trying to connect with the business community. There's many different ways of trying to make AI work for the Institute, and it wasn't for Lindsay's fantastic work, that wouldn't be possible. So join me in thanking everybody who's made this possible, and with that, I will pass, well, thank me. Or thank them. Yeah, I never get any better at this. And then I just want to pass it over to Lynn to say thank you so much. Okay. And check out the call, which will be on the website soon.
Bon, j'ai même pas pensé à faire ça en français, je m'excuse, désolé, mais ça va être plus court de même. Donc, une petite introduction pour ceux qui connaissent pas David Rokeby, et très très court parce que c'est lui qui doit parler, pas moi. So, merci d'être là. Thank you for all coming. Thank you all for coming. It's really exciting to have David here. He's based in Toronto. And it's especially exciting because we have voice scroll that we can interact with later and you can ask him questions about. So David is one of a handful of Canadian pioneers in new media art. So broadly, that's art that focuses on computer and communication technologies, related hardware like robotics, Nowadays, it tends to include bioart and other things, other emerging technologies. So of those very select few new media artists, pioneers in Canada, David's deep and enduring interest in software and the way that it delivers the world to us is, I think, what really makes him stand out. So in the early 80s, he was already working on his own software to facilitate more intuitive and embodied relationships with computing systems. This is something I really appreciate. It's something that's always been important to me. So this early research became VNS, Very Nervous System. That was around 1986. And it's a system that used video cameras, image processors, computers, and synthesizers to create a space in which you could move around and trigger or make sound and music. So then in 1991, he showed The Giver of Names, an installation which I got to see at Obero. Maybe some of you saw it. I think of that as a very early installation dealing more explicitly with artificial intelligence, so with computer vision and text synthesis. And I just want to situate this. So in 1991, Tim Berners-Lee from CERN put up the first website. And if we want to relate it more to current AI, it wasn't, I think, until 2006 that Geoffrey Hinton's deep learning algorithms began to be publicly acknowledged and available. So we're talking about 2006 there, and 1991 for David already writing his own software and seriously playing with AI. So I hope this suggests why I think David's work is so significant, but I also think his work is incredibly thoughtful and aesthetic. And The Giver of Names remains for me one of the most poetic installations I've ever experienced. So enjoy. Merci.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you to everyone involved in making it possible. I'm going to try a bit of a high wire act today because I'm trying to situate the recent stuff I've been engaged with artificial intelligence in the context of the entire sweep of my career, or certain parts of the entire sweep of my career that on reflection seem relevant or seem to be leading in this direction. So it's always hard when you're cutting your whole oeuvre into on a new angle of slicing to figure out where to start. Do I want to give any additional preamble, or do I want to launch right in? I'm going to be operating on a sort of a high level of abstraction a little bit. I'm going to be leaving out whole bunches of areas of my work to focus on a very specific area that I will get to exactly what that is. But it's so I will try to lead you on a path through a bunch of works. Initially, I'll go very quickly through a bunch of works that I, in retrospect, see as leading to the kind of explorations we're doing that you'll be able to experience with voice scroll. And we'll see how that goes. I'm going to be doing it quite quickly because we don't have a huge amount of time. So forgive me, let it all wash over you, and hopefully at the end it will start to all integrate. So I am going to share my screen. Let's see, start this. Okay, and oh yes, share my whole screen. Share and start. Good, okay. So it's really only in retrospect that I would apply this to the work that I'm going to show you first, Very Nervous System, which Lynn mentioned. But Very Nervous System was a system with a camera looking into space, and any movements that were taking place in that space were interpreted and were producing sound through sort of virtual instrumentalists who were responding to the character and quality of the movement. And it made no sound when there's no one in the space, and when you were in the space, you were drawing the sounds out of the space. So I actually loved the sense of the space itself when no one was in it. There was a space bristling with potential, things that could happen. Like the space was active and alive and ready and waiting, just like literally bristling, like with an electricity in the air. And this notion of spaces of potential is going to be a very important through line through this talk. So let's look at very nervous system. This is me interacting in 1991 with a late stage version of very nervous system in my old apartment with different glasses, different hair. The very funny thing about this is, of course, this piece, it was constantly creating new kinds of music depending on how you're moving, but I've seen this clip so many times that I can kind of hum along, and it seems like it's completely antithetical to the whole idea. But let's just run it here. First, I should say that what we're seeing is exactly the view of the camera that is also the sensor that the computer is looking through to generate the sound. And none of the music has been pre-composed. The music is algorithmic, meaning that there are tendencies or algorithms, or shall we say equations that describe a relationship between certain kinds of movement and certain kinds of sound. So that's very nervous system, an example of me just casually exploring it. It's a very strange place you go into when you're exploring it. You can see I'm kind of in this internal space. I'm not looking anywhere. I'm really being proprioceptive. I'm feeling my body, and I'm feeling my body extended out into the sound. And I could talk for 7 hours about the things I discovered through this, but we don't have that time. So I'm going to move quickly on. One of the things that people asked me about this installation was, so if I dance Swan Lake, will it play Swan Lake? Which was a sort of an absurd notion. In fact, each piece I composed within the frame of very nervous system that had different musical characteristics was in itself fairly constrained. I mean, it would never play the same music. It was always up to the person in the space to shape the way these algorithms of sound generation would unfold, but it was still fairly constrained. So the idea that you would, if you dance something different, it would create a whole different world of sound was kind of outrageous, exciting but outrageous. But I found myself wondering, can I create an interactive environment or an interactive installation with more reach, where there was more of a set of very different possibilities that could come based on the differences in what a person in the space did. So, before I get there, I'm going to talk about this notion. How many of you have any familiarity with 20th century physics? A few. Who knows about this idea of the collapsing the wave function? The wave function. No? Okay. Who's heard of Schrodinger's cat? Okay, many more. So Schrodinger's cat is about collapsing the wave function. The notion is that in reality, things are in an indeterminate state until there's an observation or some other kind of intervention. So Schrodinger, there's a cat inside a box with a vial of some poison that has or has not broken, and so the cat is both alive and dead at the same time. And until you open the box, the cat is neither alive or dead, it is both. So this notion of a wave function, which is a description of many, many possibilities, and the collapsing of that into a particular possibility is kind of what was happening with very nervous system. The space bristling with potential was kind of a wave function, a space of possibilities, and then as you enter the space, you are collapsing that space of possibilities into a particularity at that moment. So this is a notion that I will return to through the talk, and it's especially relevant to artificial intelligence. So I was really interested in whether I could create a system that would uniquely respond to every possible input. That's what I meant by reach, that you had some way of interfacing with something, but then there was not this narrow range of musical style that might be triggered, but that you could cover kind of the entirety of what you could describe with language. So I created a piece called The Giver of Names, which is literally very much like Very Nervous System. It looks at things and it makes sound. But in this case, it looks at objects and it talks about them. And I did this piece because I was hearing a lot of people talking about intelligent agents on the web and things like that. And I thought, what does it mean that we're using the word intelligence about things that aren't human? And how might this change what we mean by intelligence? And what does it mean to actually try to make something that's intelligent? So I spent 10 years developing ways to play at creating an intelligence because I really wanted to understand what was involved. I needed to feel it. I'm the kind of person who learns by making. That's it. That is my fundamental way to learn, is to make. And by making and failing at making, I learn more than by theorizing, etc. So that's my mode. So I had to make this thing. I had to make this thing that looked at objects and talked about them. Right now, in the contemporary moment, we would call this an image captioning system. And there are lots of AI systems that can do this, but then it was a different story. And everything had to be written with rules. I wrote thousands of rules and millions of lines of code to do this. So this is The Giver of Names. So in The Giver of Names, we have a space. We have a space and a gallery with a pile of household objects, toys, etc. on the floor, a pedestal. You can pick up anything you want and make a still life on top of the pedestal. When there's stillness at the top of the pedestal, a camera looking at the top of the pedestal grabs an image and starts to analyze that image. And we see the analysis of the image on the screen above. So it looks for edges. It tries to resolve what the actual colors of the image are. We'll watch it more close up here. So it's finding the edges of the objects. Then it's trying to get rid of all the highlights and strange color areas so that it says, okay, this is red as opposed to a bit orangey, a bit pinky. Trying to understand, simplify the image in a coherent way. Then it looks at the outlines it's found. So it's kind of stimulating itself with the information it's gathered from this process of analysis. And there's a knowledge set of 100,000 words and ideas that are all interconnected. So the idea of an orange is connected to its roundness and its orangeness. The color orange is connected to everything else that's orange. The roundness is connected to everything else that's round. So when you stimulate an idea, when it sees something that's round, everything associated with roundness is stimulated. And we see here a field of stimulation, all the words that were stimulated by different objects there. So that creates a landscape, things that are very excited and things that are not excited. And from that, it generates sentences. And these are not canned sentences. It's generated using a generative grammar, so it builds from sentence to noun phrase, verb phrase, and builds out from there. So it can create any sentence we could possibly imagine in the English language. And importantly, it speaks this out loud. It speaks the sentence out loud. So here's an example.
By the timely day, the holy castle of the vermilion flock is unceasingly split by the breathtaking pistol, under which the enlightenment does harm.
Now, everything it says there is relevant to what it sees. I don't know why it said vermilion, but I know there's a reason. The breathtaking pistol is obvious, others are not. This is a proud daddy moment. This is one of those times when a thing you create does something that you just think really nails it. The second thing it's going to say, unless I've edited this video to get rid of the first. Let's see.
To that devotion, the steadfastly orange yellow bomb flogged this syphilitic roundy plenitude.
So, horn of plenty, plenitude, horny, it's all there anyway. So, this was a system that importantly, I wrote every line of code for, but I never knew it was going to do. And I was playing with this tension between creating a field of possibilities and a way that people could, in a very simple way, interact with, provoke, prod this field of possibilities in a way that I couldn't predict and yet also knew I was responsible for. I was, among other things, playing with what my role and responsibility and power was or was not as an interactive artist. Okay, so we're going to move on from here rather quickly now. Possible Montreals. So again, possibility space. So I was invited by the Langlois Foundation back in 2006 to do an installation, and I placed 2 cameras on top of a building near the corner of Saint Laurent and Sherbrooke, and the cameras were on pan-tilt mounts, and every day they surveyed the city at exact positions, starting at different places in the cycle at different times of day to capture every angle of light at every time of day in every kind of weather of the city of Montreal. So this is the path of one of the cameras. This is the path of another of the cameras. This is actually part of Boulevard Saint Laurent right there. And this is what happens as it stitches together from the, whoops, let's see if Zoom can, this is very challenging for Zoom because it's a continuous pan. It's much smoother than this. The smoothness is really important, in fact, to this piece because you have to feel like it's as though you're looking through a camera, and these transformations at first, are they just a change in light or what? There are moments of perceptual catastrophe where it feels like possible. It could be contemporary. It could be this moment. I could be scanning the city and then something impossible happens. But it's also encyclopedic about this city. And it's a way of navigating through this vast space of possibilities of the city. If you want to see more of this, on the 15th, if you can get tickets at the SAT, my wife Eva Goyen is going to be playing a beautiful piano piece to a slowed down version of this as an hour-long presentation, should you be intrigued. I'm going to zip ahead a little. Well, we cover a lot of territory in this. Let's see. It kind of covers it includes, let's see if I can get to it, includes moments of heavy excavation. There's one. So we have nice collisions of the excavation, the street, etc. So anyway, that's Machine for Taking Time, Boulevard Saint Laurent. So the next piece I'm going to show you, these are pieces, this piece is a piece that none of you have probably seen because of intellectual property rights. I can't share this on the internet. This is a piece that was commissioned by the Image Center at Toronto Metropolitan University. They have a huge collection of photojournalistic images from the 20th century, and I was invited to make something out of that vast array of images of most of the important events of the 20th century. And I decided I wanted to play a game with them. And so the game is that I start with the image completely blurred, and I slowly move something like a fovea, the part of our eye that can see detail. I slowly move it. Oh, I haven't started it yet. Slowly move the fovea through the image, slowly revealing from, right now it's a possibility space. What is this image? We don't know. It could be a lot of things. It's not clear, but we're starting to see detail. So slowly revealing bits and pieces of the image. You'll notice that I kind of like slow. I kind of like slowing things down. This is in fact very similar to what we do when we look at an image. Our eye can only see high resolution at about the size of a loonie held at the end of at the length of a hand held out in front of you. And we collect bits of detail, and then we fabricate our sense of what the image is from that collected detail. We don't see the whole image. So this is kind of the super slow motion version of our process of recognizing an image from collecting bits of detail. So now we finally see the full image shown. And this piece goes through a whole bunch of images from the collection through this process. And this is the backside of the actual print that was used in was sent to some news organization or something. Okay, I won't show more of this. Okay, so a different approach to this. Again, a little bit like the bristling space of possibilities that I was talking about with very nervous system. This is a piece called Handheld. In this case, we have, with 2 projectors and depth sensor, a space of images, a volume of images that are invisible until they rest on your hands. So you explore this up and down. It's a 3-dimensional volume of images, and we explore it with our hands. So this is the hand coming up and down through the field of images. Sometimes there's a stack of video frames like this, so as you move through, you get a moving image. And there are ribbons of text that are very hard to find. They're very ephemeral, floating in space. They go out of focus. There's a depth of field simulated so that if you're slightly below, it goes out of focus. So you have to follow the curve of the text in space. And this was partly related to, it's a little bit separate from the mainstream of what I'm talking about here, but also the notion of tactility, what tactility means in the contemporary moment. So we stroke screens all the time with our fingers, but there's nothing there to touch. Also, surprisingly, works very well with multiple people. We'll move on here. Okay, place through time, possible worlds suspended in an archive. So this is a different kind of possibility space, is an archive, and the archive related to a specific space. So this is a public art project created for the city of Calgary, and I had access to all these archives from the newspapers from 1870 through to 1905. And you'll see I created a 150-foot long ribbon across this very strange part of the city, which was surfacing little bits of the archive. So I was placing the archive into the city, reminding us that this space that people were moving through had all these other states historically. So a possibility state across time. I'll move through this a little quickly because this is showing just the fact that this is a sort of a, there was this wound across the city of Calgary produced by the railway, and that's the reason there's this very strange underpass that the public art is in. And so this becomes a repository for civic memory that's continuously unfolding. And I'll do this quickly rather than go to the part where it talks about this. You can text to it and jog its memory. So if you text something about disease, it will start talking about a cholera epidemic or whatever. So it's a way of navigating the space of, again, possible Calgary. Not just possible Calgary, but the Calgary that did exist. But is the sort of idea that all these histories are overlaid in some way across time in this space. Okay. So now we get to AI proper. In AI, we talk about something called the latent space, which is the space of possibilities. It's the space of possible things that were learned from the things that the model was trained on. So most models have been trained on all the text from the internet or all the images from this, whatever. There is implied by this training data a volume, and this volume is not three-dimensional. We can only really think in 3 dimensions. So we think of a space. You imagine a space as 3-dimensional. I can put a box here, and I can put a box beside it, and I can stack a box on it, and I put one that way. So we have 3 places we can put things in relationship to each other. In the latent space of an AI model, we have sometimes many millions of dimensions. So I can put a box here, I can put a box on top, I can put one over here, but I can put one in a million other directions. So we can pack enormous amounts and hold enormous amounts of information in this space of possibilities. So let's look at fields of possibilities in an AI space. Just to get us into this, this is from a study of what stimulating individual parts of a image classification AI system will show you. So this is a system that has been shown a lot of images and been told, okay, that's a cat, that's a parakeet, this is a car, etc. It turns out you can turn this process backwards. Instead of recognizing images and giving them names, you can prod parts of the network and make it produce images. So at the first layer, we have images that are just really gradients and edges of things. And AI systems are made of many, many layers. So the first layer after the input is these very simple gradients. The next layer, we start to see round things, arcs, corners. So these are the images that were being presented, and this is what individual parts of the model were being excited by. In the same way, perhaps you might imagine that in the giver of names, by putting an object on the pedestal, you're exciting part of the knowledge base. As we go further on in the network, we start to see things that recognize what appear to be faces. Here's something recognizing wheels, but sometimes it misrecognizes. These are something else that's a little bit like that. And on, now we have things that recognize dogs' ears and wheels, but sometimes faces. Various kinds of structure. Now, it turns out you can play with this. This is producing random noise and then having the system hallucinate structure into it. So it's starting with a wave function, a whole bunch of possibilities. It's collapsing into a very particular image. It could have collapsed in other ways. It happened to collapse into this very strange image. We can look at the individual parts of this. Again, at the low level, if we stimulate at the low level, we get textures. We go deeper, we start to get coherent structure. Then we start to get something richer. These ones are very strange. And then we get to, this seems to be flesh. This is some sort of hallucination of flesh. I don't know, birds maybe. Food on banquet tables. These are babies in cribs. These are all, now it's important to understand, these are all within the model itself. These are not gathered from the internet. After the model's trained, you stimulate it the right way, you get this image. These are of the many possibilities that the model holds internally. Those are, bicycle wheels, chairs, attempts to write text, architectural forms, and mixes of, again, so this is, we're probably familiar with the notion of AI hallucinating. This kind of, the research at this era, this is 2018, 2019, was where this notion of these hallucinations first came out. So this is a good time to bring up voice scroll. So one thing that's happened to me in the last few years is as the newest stuff coming out of the AI lab started to become visible to us, I, having played with AI in the 90s with the giver of names, felt this inexorable gravitational attraction to it. And I also had an awareness that this could very easily be very impactful, and I wanted to understand it. And I wanted to go back to the space I was able to go into as a young artist in the 80s and 90s, where I could spend 10 years diving into something to truly understand it and to create things to help other people to share what I had seen in that process as art installations. So right now I am directing a lab at the University of Toronto. It's an AI research lab inside the theater department. So that's a very unusual place to have an AI lab. It's a wonderful place to have an AI lab because it's a place where assumptions about, sort of techno-utopian ideas are very automatically suspect, where people are very aware of the importance of cultural expression, of the importance of embodiment. They're often trained in movement practices, so they're very interesting critics of AI. So I love being, and also, of course, because of a very nervous system, I have a long history of being interested in the moving body, et cetera. So what voice scroll is one product of my lab, and it's on the edge of being an artwork. I feel uncomfortable calling it an artwork because usually in my artwork I produce everything. And in this case, it's resting on the shoulders of things coming out of all sorts of AI labs. But it's a particular intervention where we take an image generation system, so text to image. So some of you will be familiar with DALL-E or Stable Diffusion or things like that. But wanting to bring it to a space where it can be performed, where you can argue with it, where you can talk to it, where you can engage with it in a more intuitive way. Now, I'm just randomly filling it with text right now, which means it's doing somewhat messy nonsense. But let me give you an example. Let me let it settle. I'm walking through a deep, dark forest. A deep, dark forest in the autumn. There's a stream running through the forest, and the stream tumbles over rocks and boulders, and it comes to a waterfall, a huge waterfall tumbling into a gorge. A huge waterfall tumbling into a gorge. And there's a hot air balloon. There's a hot air balloon. Hot air balloon. Okay, good. So this is a very basic demonstration of the system. This kind of system, to understand what's going on, this is called a multimodal model. So ChatGPT is a one-modal model. It's just text. This is a model that, in its space of possibilities, knows how to position text and how to position images. So any image and any text will be somewhere, have some address in this very high-dimensional space. And if they happen to be close to each other in this high-dimensional space, the text and the image will reflect each other. So I am speaking through an image, voice recognition system talking directly to the system. So we can have more fun. We can say, huge birthday cake in the middle of Place des Arts in Montreal. Huge birthday cake in the middle of Place des Arts in Montreal. Last day's hour, okay, not working. But in the style of Paul Gauguin. Okay, so we have a lot of fluid space that we can work with. So it's important to understand this model is not reaching out to the internet. This model is, all the possibilities for all the images we're seeing are contained in the model that's on a computer upstairs on the 3rd floor. So somehow the model is containing all these possibilities. I can talk about infinite reaches of the universe, strands and filaments of intelligence swirling around black holes with nebulae and cat's eyes of cats. Give me eyes of cats. Okay. So that's voice scroll in its simplest form. Now we've learned that we can do a lot of interesting playing with this by adding what we call ambient prompts. So this is what's called the prompt, the text that I'm asking it to illustrate. But I can ask to have the filter, which is, I'm talking upstairs, the second row, the second button on the second row. Could you please press the second button on the second row? Okay, that's not the right one. Second, so the other second button of the second row. From the bottom, the second row up, second row across. There we go. Okay, so this one, we see at the top what the filter is. In this case, it's dystopian graphic novel, heavily polluted, painted by Otto Dix, Korean woodblock print, cyberpunk, apocalyptic future, and manga style. So I can talk about ninja rats eating pizza in Tokyo Harbor, surrounded by assassins with noodles for pistols. I don't know. I'm making up. So it's obviously very inflected in this case. It's trying to make the noodles. Lots of noodles. Tokyo Harbor filled with noodles. Yeah, okay. So again, in this case, we have taken the entirety of the space of possibilities, and by having these ambient prompts, we're narrowing into a particular zone of the space of possibilities. Can we have the one to the right of this, the button to the right? Okay, I think that's to the left. Try in the other right. No? Okay, from the bottom, up 1, across 3. From the bottom, up, no, that's up 1, across 2. Up 1, across 1 more, to the right of the one that you had before. Now you're way up on the top row. It's a good thing I've mapped these buttons. Now, so from the bottom, go up 1 row, go across, not the first, not the second, but the third. Well, this will work. It's fine. We're in graffiti. Diego Rivera, Max Ernst. Oh, no, we're switching. Okay, let's just say we have a lot of, so I actually have an iPad app that I can dial up and change these filters completely. And we've worked with a poet named Nick Flynn from New York to tune these filters. This is the one I wanted. North Korean propaganda, Soviet propaganda poster, American advertising from the 50s, et cetera, et cetera. Let's have Kim Jong-un wearing a Santa Claus outfit. Yeah, okay. So now what's interesting is actually once you have a strong filter on here, you cannot express as wide a range of things. It's narrowing the space of possibilities, but it's making it meaningful. And one of the interesting things we discovered from this is most AI systems try to be everything. They try to be omniscient. They try to take in all the text of the world or all the images of the world. But when we think about creating as an artist with AI, we have a problem, which is that when we think about the artists we go to who compel us, it's not because they're everything. It's because they're a very specific thing. Their life story, the things they've never cared about, the things they care deeply about, the things they don't even know that they care about are part of what gives them their artistic style and their artistic vision that is what compels us. And so how, as artists working with AI, do we deal with the fact that expression amongst humans is much more specific and particular thing than this all possibilities of everything that AI is representing? Okay, I'm going to pick up that thread in a second. I'm going to hop over here, grab some water. Check my time. Okay, we're doing okay. What I want to do is I want to show you a little bit of the work we did with the poet, Nick Flynn. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint.
Yeah, we stopped your screen share.
So I will start it again. How dare you?
I know, I'm sorry.
Okay, so where is my screen share? I've got to go back into here. Kill that. Screen share. And I've got to start this again. Okay, so this is, so Nick Flynn is a New York poet. This is a poem that he wrote about the period of the coronavirus lockdowns. He came to work with us in the lab. He's reading his poem, although he's slowing down his reading a lot and sometimes repeats sections because he wants to reinforce certain things. And we've tuned the filters to be something that is appropriate to the poem because we don't want it to show everything. We don't want it to suddenly be a beer commercial and then suddenly be a map and suddenly be a whatever. We want it to be stuff that supports the poem without overwhelming it. So sometimes you'll see it will fall into this kind of strange scientific pictorial space. That's often when he's talking about something abstract. So it settles into the space, which is appropriate, you'll see, to coronavirus. And sometimes very particular images will jump forward. He'll draw them forward. And this is playing with the space of possibilities that we generated with this particular prompt, which involves X-ray microscopes, early 20th century photography, and a bunch of other things. So these are the influences.
Notes on Corona. Snow woke me.
Oops.
Flakes so white, I felt blind. Sometimes we don't like the angels God sends. the preacher preached. This one wears a crown. This one is a thorn. My daughter wanted to go, so I typed church into Yelp and took her. The choir was small, but enough to fill us. You've heard, no doubt, of my earlier life. My earlier life was something I held inside and tried to destroy before it could destroy me. A lot, yes, was taken for granted, and often it was, yes, me who took it. In every field now, we are building rooms made of air. We call them thresholds. Where is everyone, you ask, as your voice echoes across the emptiness, as everything slowly unplugs? I had to unplug my life. At each leg, the terminal was empty. I ate a sandwich from a machine. In long-term parking, a yellow film dusted my car. Downtown, a man rode a shopping cart in the middle of the street. Another rode past on a child's bike, baring his teeth. Is this the way it ends? Maps on TV, red splotches blotting out towns, home sudden and far away. I kept a list of things to do folded in my pocket. This list is one you don't want to be on. Today, the air is silent, but soon will be loud. Today, it is birds, but soon will be sirens. What was here, we ask, passing an empty storefront? We ask, is blank still alive? But instantly regret it. The low flowers of spring have just appeared, a chain of purple pushing up from the dark. Anemone, gentian, creeping Charlie. See you on the other side. Regret. On the other side, on the tiny screen in my palm, I see Rome. I see the bridge I'd cross on my Vespa, empty now, yet overflowing. The Tevere, overflowing. A word we hear more and more. Our borders, our streets, our hearts, overflowing, overflowing, overflowing. Once we came this close to losing each other. Once you get on the machine, it is unlikely you'll ever get off. Get off, we whisper to the cop kneeling on your neck, his hand in his pocket, his partner's knee on your lungs, the whole force lined up, all of us, all the way down your spine. Oh, mama, you gasp, until each molecule of your name becomes you, until thousands of you stand outside his door, offering him another beer before we burn his house down. After the house across from him burned, my friend stood at the window behind his daughter, looking out at the emptiness. Trucks outside hospitals, blocks of ice, tents set up in parks, as if they'd been there since the Civil War. Where did everyone go? My daughter asks. This is the world without us, comes the answer. This is what inside looks like. Inside looks like 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Inside looks like the word overflowing and a chain of purple pushing up from the dark. It was Paul in Galatians who said, "You have heard, no doubt, of my earlier life, offering atonement, seeking forgiveness. Now we've forgotten what it was we were going to do with this day. Snow woke us, flakes so white they nearly blinded us."
So it's an interesting example for us, partly because it's trying to get at how can we be creative with AI. I will admit that I'm quite perplexed how to be creative with AI, because what AI is capable of is both ornery and unlimited at the same time, and overwhelming. And as an artist, I find myself wondering what it is to make an image, what it is to make an artwork. But there are spaces and possibilities, like I think this poem shows, where you have an interesting relationship that develops between human creativity and some sort of augmentation or addition that comes from a completely different place. When we were working with Nick in the lab, after he was done, he said, "It's too bad my book has gone to the printers, because I feel the poems rewriting themselves." And I asked him what he meant by that, and he said, well, as a poet, you're working alone in your own room, writing, thinking what these words might conjure. And then the book goes out, and you start talking to people who've read the book, and they come back with these surprising connections and associations to your words that you hadn't anticipated. And he said, talking to this system showed him some of those unexpected valences of words in a way that made him see that words opened other pathways that he'd intended, and he could imagine how, as a writer, he could take advantage of that and rework the poems to embrace this space of the possible meanings of words in a new way. So I've been talking about this notion of space of possibilities, and I wanted to address the question, why should we care about spaces of possibility? There are specific urgent things that are going on in the world. Why talk about this very expanded notion of spaces of possibilities? I think what's interesting about the idea of spaces of possibilities, let's go back to the notion of the collapse of the wave function. We live in a huge universe. We all live in this huge universe, and it's too complex for us to digest. We have partial and limited information about it. We only see tiny bits of it. And yet it is a world we share. In our brains, we hold the complex of our experiences, our hopes, our fears, the way we were brought up, etc., as a very complex space of possibilities that is our character. But when we speak, we have to flatten that space. We have to collapse the wave function into a stream of words or into an artwork or whatever that we attempt then to share. We try to share something about this space that lives inside us through these tokens. Then we hope that those tokens will then explode into the space of possibilities of another person's mind. We're trying in a way to induce an experience in the viewer of our art, the reader of our stories, whatever, that is in some way hopefully resonant with what we had intended as artists. But we're taking one space of possibilities, collapsing it into this flattened representation that we can share and hoping it will expand. Okay, that's one thing. But separately, what we see, and we especially see it now politically, the space of possibilities has been collapsed into the fascist flattening, into the socialist flattening, into the LGBTQ-friendly flattening, and the oh my God, fundamentalist, no way flattening. These are all flattenings of the same universe, and if we understand that they are all these lower dimensional reductions of something that we share, there may be possibility for us to understand in a richer way how to come back to sharing that space instead of the hyper-polarized space that we're in. So I'll stop the talking now, because I love questions, and I have just touched on the edge of so many things. So and questions, I especially like dumb questions because those are the ones I haven't thought of yet, and you'll get more interesting answers. So do not be embarrassed by any question. We're all learning about this stuff. AI is still a mystery to me, and I spend, 8 hours a day or 12 hours a day thinking about it. So thank you. I'd also say this microphone is also connected to voice scroll, so we can both try it out here, but afterwards we can try it out upstairs. So, but questions?
Yes, so if anyone here on this side has a question, please feel free to come up to the main microphone. If you don't feel comfortable standing, raise your hand and we will get a microphone to you. Those of you on the other side, I will periodically come over there with a microphone too, just to see if you have any questions. So, anyone first?
Yes.
Is it okay? Yeah. I'm wondering if you have compiled, I don't know how to say that, text, music, and images.
Have I ever combined them? Well, most likely, yes. I'm just trying to think. I have often combined images and music. Text I have been much more nervous about because as an artist, I think if I could write it, I wouldn't have to make it. And I love and hate language as this flattening of potential. It's incredibly useful. It helps us communicate. And yes, it is a massive reduction. And so almost every piece I do, I think, should there be text in this piece? And almost every time the answer is, well, no. So I have not, but I've been on the edge of it a lot. I love words, but I'm also very suspicious of them. And I'm suspicious of how prescriptive they are. Yes?
You're a good poet.
Oh, thank you.
You make association incredible.
Well, I don't have to use words then. I just do it as an artist. I think I learned early on in university that I was pretty good with language and rational processes, and that I could lead myself incredibly astray with those very easily. And so I always try to ground what I do in a practice that is not involving words as a way to balance the fact that there's always this intellectual energy that's part of me as well. So I have to keep it in balance in some way.
Thank you for presenting this, and I also wanted to say that the video was so beautiful and I think was something that we so often don't attach to emotion. Around AI. It was a really emotional experience.
Remember that the emotion there is coming from the human intervention. It's the images feel emotional, and we experience them as emotional because they're backed with other things that we're associating with it. It's interesting to look at those images without the words and see, are they emotional? Maybe a little bit here and there, but we have a way as humans, as we collapse into language, of making this extra effort to create something that I'm delivering you with those words, a potential that will expand in you. And that's something that an AI is never thinking about. So, but anyway, thank you.
I guess along that lines, one thing you brought up earlier in the talk was around slowness and how you think a lot about slowness. And I think there's an interesting tension between that and the AI industry as a whole, which tends to try and move at breakneck speeds. So how do you try to approach that slowness, or at least that tension within your own work?
Yeah, it is tricky. I mean, I've been working with technology for 45 years now as an artist, and that's always a challenge. To not just the speed of development, but just the speed at which the computers work, etc. So I've become insistent about slowness. There's something that happens in slowness that is different than what happens when things are hitting you at maximum velocity. And I feel, especially when things are moving fast, that it's important that some of us move as slowly as possible within that fastness to provide some measured reflection while it's happening. And it's a tricky balance, because in a sense, what we're trying to do, for example, in my lab, is share knowledge about how these systems work enough that but in a slow and human consumable way, so that we as humans can ask the questions and make the demands about the future we want, not the future that would be delivered. That takes this weird mixture of being close enough to the edge, the surfing the wave of AI creation, but reserving the space to then consider, without panic, as slowly as necessary, to really digest and make sense out of what's actually going on in these systems. It's a very delicate dance, very hard. I feel like I've been trying to find that balance my entire life.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that awesome talk. I really appreciate it at the end that you brought up this idea of flattening in the socio-political landscape that we're living in. And I was curious about your thoughts about that in relation to AI, because I see AI as like accelerating that and like rapidly contributing to that kind of flattening in a lot of ways in our lives, and how we think about our bodies in relation to art, in relation to language. And I was just really curious to hear your thoughts about that as an artist who uses AI.
So one of the reasons I played with this notion of possibility space or latent space in this talk is because there's a real tension in what's happening in AI and our public experience of AI between what's going on inside the model, which is ironically richly nuanced, full of the ability to support multiple contradictions simultaneously in this very capacious space of ideas, and the fact that we only deal with the flattened collapse of the wave function. When we talk to GPT, we don't see all the things that are bearing, we just see the words that have come out at the end. And when we generate an image, we're also seeing just one example of that. But for me, what's most interesting with an AI system is the complex, richly ambiguous space in the middle. It's a space that, for example, can embrace without problem fluidity of gender or multi-diversity of race. These are totally compatible to the interior space of a model. But when we flatten them, when we ask for classifications, when we ask for predictions, then it flattens to a normative space that is what is statistically normal is reinforced, and that's a huge problem. So there's an interesting tension between when you find ways to dig into and navigate through the interior world of these models, then it has something to teach us about the power of possibility spaces. And yet, as humans, we're always looking for answers, right? This is different from the suspension of a world of rich possibilities and our kind of fearful demand for answers. And we are killing ourselves because we want those answers too much. And fast-moving AI will feed into that unless we find ways to intervene. I don't think I fully answered the beginning of your question. So I got myself thinking and then I lost the full...
No, that definitely started addressing it. I guess I'm just wondering whether that slowness for AI, given its inherent possibilities, speed up the process of trying to end up in a classification space or trying to get an answer to a problem, contributes to that acceleration and drive towards an answer rather than a question. And I know I'm speaking very vaguely.
I don't mind the vagueness at all. I speak vaguely too a lot. Because I like to think of the computer in all senses. For myself, I use it as an organic, as a prosthetic organ of philosophy, as a way to pose questions in new and different ways that may have been questions that have been asked, like the mind-body problem. Didn't we solve that? No, and it's become super urgent now, because the possibility of a disembodied intelligence makes us have to ask what it means to reason without a body, to speak without a body. What does that mean, right? These questions become surfaced again in a very rich way. Unfortunately, very few people approach technology as an organ of philosophy. They think of it as a way to be more efficient, the way to solve a problem, etc. It's understandable why we approach it that way. I have an essay due tomorrow. How can I get there, right? I mean, we're dealing with a lot of different kinds of pressure, and it takes I think one of the special things about being an artist is that we have a tendency to find ways to create the space that is a little inefficient and doesn't fit into the flow, but where we can start to ask those questions. And while we may question how much power we have in asking those questions, I really do think we as artists tend to underestimate the power of that. And that people working at the higher levels of this are strangely sometimes asking questions that they will find the answers to from artists if we find the way to have those conversations. A lot of AI researchers are like, oh God, we need the humanities because questions are coming up in our work and we don't know how to answer them. Well, you know, okay. Part of the problem is when an AI researcher phrases that question, they phrase it in a language that makes most humanities people and artists run in the opposite direction because they'll talk about the user, not human, or, you know, all the language is wrong. But there is a surprising amount, to me, a surprising amount of openness and curiosity and concern within the AI community about what the implications of the technology will be as well. But they don't have the permission structure or the language necessarily to pursue those. So I have a lot of computer scientists and engineers working in my lab, and I treasure those moments when they overhear a conversation amongst some of the artists or performers in the lab, and they go, I've never heard a conversation like that in my life. I had no idea that what we're doing has all these other implications. I mean, those moments are very precious because that's where we start to find ways to build the bridges I think we need to between all, not just, we don't just think about disciplines, about artists and scientists, but all of culture. We need to be part of a conversation here. And we need to find ways, hopefully with some of these works, I can help to make that conversation more tangible for people, but we need to have that conversation. Because as you can see right now, shit's going down. That's really crazy. So it can be hard to take the time in the space of that urgency, but I think we need to find ways nonetheless, or else we become servo-mechanically strapped to the chaos that we're approached to, and we have no then control over what we do in the context of it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have actually a question back here first, if you don't mind.
Thank you. So I'm an artist I'm like just starting to work with some AI systems, and a criticism that I get often in class from other students is their concern about copyright laws and just kind of the stolen data that's used to make these systems. So I'm just wondering if you have like a ready-to-go answer that you give, because you must get that all the time.
I don't have any ready-to-go answers to give. I think it's a really concerning thing, certainly. I mean, for example, I don't use contemporary artists in any of the filters for voice scroll because I'm totally aware of the complex, even just like, how do I make a living as an artist if my IP can be sucked into a model and then stuff that looks like my work can be done? Like, I think it's a very valid concern, and I get lots of people asking me, how do we get people to trust AI? And I'm like, you do not want to trust AI. It has to deserve our trust. It has to earn our trust. We have to become literate enough with it to feel like we're in a position to maybe figure out where we can trust it and where we can't. And certainly in terms of just scraping all kinds of cultural content, I mean, the attempt is to scrape all of the content of culture so that the model holds all of culture. On one level, that's kind of beautiful. It's the collective unconscious, sort of, in a way that maybe the surrealists dreamed of. On the other hand, it has very, very real implications for artists trying to make a living. There are some very good initiatives being done by, say, Holly Herndon and her partner, looking at ways to come up with opt-in, voluntary, custom-produced data sets to do ethically sourced AI, and I think that's really important. Oh, there we go. Yeah, of course. So I don't have a pat answer, and with this work, I know it's scraped. Like if I name contemporary artists, it will fabricate fake works by those contemporary artists. It will do that, and that concerns me. And I'm aware of the fact that this artifact that I'm showing you contains, therefore, or has been trained on all this material. But I do think it's super important for some of us to be exploring all the layers of these issues without just saying, okay, ethically it's wrong, so we can't explore it. I think we need to explore it as artists so we can warn and show different possibilities than what people want us to, what Elon Musk or Sam Altman from OpenAI imagine us doing with it. We've got to imagine our own space for AI. We've got to imagine our own space for AI, and that requires some involvement. I have nothing against people who say, I don't want to use AI, I don't want to see an image from AI. I understand. I personally can't, knowing what I know and what I'm capable of, I feel I need, and my contribution can be from exploring it and articulating it and critiquing it. So it's not the easy answer to give your classmates, but there are not so many easy answers.
David, I just wanted to jump in to say that there were maybe some people in the audience that prepared something to read or a text or something like that. If they'd like to just go up to the mic, you can say it that way and we can.
Sure.
We can
And I see questions.
But there are
Let's
other questions.
hold on to
also.
those questions. We'll get to them.
On my way.
So I actually have a question, but I'm also set to read a poem.
Okay. Yeah.
Can I do both?
You can do both. I'll just say that it's good to read a poem slowly.
Yeah.
Only because although it can handle you reading quickly, the images will emerge more effectively if you read slowly.
Okay, I gathered that. And I also saw degradations of Elon Musk on the screen, which was enjoyable.
Careful
and
what you
amusing
say. Speech has consequences. I mean.
Maybe I'll be cheeky and say my poem and then ask my question.
So before you do that, I would just ask, so this is the wide open model right now. Do you want it to go anywhere?
Do you have Paul Klee?
So there is one of the...
He's one of my favorite 19th century painters.
Okay, so can whoever's up there click through the buttons from the lower left-hand corner one after another, and I'll yell stop.
I think we got the orientation figured out, David, if you want to give the button.
Okay, that's Mac. No, one more. Okay, Paul, stop there, stop there. So, but go back one. So Paul Klee is in this, but it's also Hieronymus Bosch, Max Ernst.
Okay, that's a good mix.
Okay.
So I want to give some context for my poem. A little bit about me is that I actually work at the Applied AI Institute. I'm really thrilled to be on the team. I am the responsible AI adoption lead, and I like to think of my job as taming AI. And I'm also an artist, and I do two things in my work and my art. What I do is I like to uncover hidden power and truths to understand what's operating in the world and how power is wielded. And I also like to be engaging in what I call radical vulnerability for freedom. So I'm going to share a somewhat intimate poem, and it relates to an experience I had in 2022 when I froze embryos.
Okay, and I will mention that before you start, we'll leave about 10 seconds of silence, which will clear things.
That's a lot of space for me as a person who's a pretty fast talker, but I'll do my best. So this poem is called Les rêves des autres, which means for Anglophones in the room and people who aren't as fluent in French, as I'm not as fluent in French, the dreams of others. Told to listen, taught to obey, in brackets, never did. Taught to stand by for instruction. Took me until 33 to realize that what they wanted was not for me. Those were the dreams of others, vindicated potentially by my choices, nearly brought into fruition, into being, birthed to reality through my oocytes, my flesh, until I finally told them all no.
So you'll see partly that this first...
Thank you. I've never read a poem before. It was the first time for me.
So you'll see that this is quite a powerful filter, so it doesn't leave so much space for your words. Because this one has a lot up there, a lot of influences. You could try the same poem with a different filter to see what happens.
Let's try it.
Okay, let's just, can you go to the lower left-hand button, the no filters, just to see what happens when there's no filters.
Yeah, I like that. It'll give up more possibility.
Okay.
Told to listen, taught to obey, in brackets, never did, taught to stand by for instruction. Took me until 33 to realize that what they wanted was not for me. Those were the dreams of others, vindicated potentially by my choices, nearly brought to fruition into being. Birth to reality through my oocytes, my flesh, until I finally told them all no.
So now we see something else, which is that this system is really bad at abstractions. So it was trained on images and the captions that accompany them. And so something that cannot be imaged, it doesn't really know how to do.
Didn't really get the word oocyte?
Did not, well, that's the voice recognition having a hard time with that. So we're dealing with 2 layers of not quite getting it. So when we worked with Nick Flynn with his poems, the first experience was like that. It wasn't gelling. And we, by tuning the ambient prompt specifically to the world space of the poem, then we started to get the energy there. So it's an interesting thing about both how powerful and how ornery and hard to wrangle these systems can be. So it takes a lot of work to actually get to the place where you get a satisfying result. Even though there's a lot of instant gratification here, if you want to go deeper, it's hard. It takes a lot of effort.
I don't know if there's other poems.
So there were also a couple, there's poems and questions, so I want to make sure we're covering all of them.
Can I ask a really quick question?
Okay.
The quick question is, I'm actually running an art exhibit this year on AI, oracles, and reality, because I'm fascinated by AI as an oracle and how oracles are a type of AI. And I was wondering if you have any advice for me. It's the first time I'm doing it. I'm learning a lot. Do you have any provocations?
So I used to throw the I Ching daily to help me maneuver through my late adolescent, early 20s social drama situations. I would throw the I Ching 3 or 4 times a day.
Okay.
And what I learned from that was that it didn't really matter what it said. What it said forced me to understand what I actually wanted or what I actually felt. So an oracle is really a kind of a tool for playing out our conscious and unconscious space. What we hear and what we don't hear in the oracles is important as what it says. And so recognizing that the human mind is the medium of the oracle is an important part of that. Yeah, so that's my...
I like the images that appeared as you spoke as well. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
I'd like to note here, we have 2 questions over here, so I'm going to get to both of these before I head over to the other section.
Right.
Hello. Especially as we're kind of talking about concepts of endless possibilities, of unflattening things, I really can't help of thinking of sustainability, especially this is kind of, it's generating images all the time. Relentlessly. And in the context of the amount of power and electricity and water that it takes to run AI and train it and all of the other systems, I can't help being provoked to kind of think, is endless something we even should strive for? In terms of, because it also comes with the consequences of what something endless is. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, so I mean, even beyond the environmental question, there's a question, does our culture need more images at all, right? Even one more is maybe more than enough, right? So yes, the environmental costs of AI are significant, especially in the training of the model. And that's part of the problem. There is a belief within the sort of tech bro Silicon Valley space of AI that scale is going to solve everything. And so we train a bigger model on more data for longer. It will finally become God or whatever they imagine it's going to become. And And there are actually ways to use AI with vanishingly small amounts of energy if we aren't striving for AGI on this like scale is the only thing that matters sort of trajectory. So this is running on a large workstation, but it's using about as much energy as one 100-watt light bulb in normal cases. So it's an incandescent light bulb, so that's not environmentally friendly, but it's compared to taking an Uber across town, it's a vanishingly small amount of energy. So it's important to understand that it's not all of the AI thing. And in fact, a lot of AI now will run on your phone or your computer at very low things. And you can also fine tune and do things with the models locally. But there is a wanton abuse of environmental water texture that the Silicon Valley mindset about maximum acceleration towards AI, that's definitely a huge problem and going to get worse. So it remains a very important question. But we could say the same about streaming Netflix. Huge amounts of power consumption now involved in streaming Netflix. So many things right now that we sort of think of as inconsequential are actually using large amounts of data in problematic ways. So it's a really good and important question for us to keep in mind and to think about how to navigate.
Yeah, I'm curious if I can just the follow-up of like, absolutely, there are definitely ways to address the sustainability of AI systems. I'm also curious about like the artistic and kind of philosophical intention of striving towards endlessness. Is that something to want at all? And kind of, I think that it's often looked at as something really great, and I'm just curious about how you view that.
So I think it's important. I've been talking a lot about these sort of fields of enormous possibilities. But I think of this from a philosophical perspective. As I said, I use the technology as a sort of prosthetic organ of philosophy, as I said. And what's important to me about the fields of possibilities is actually the field of possibilities in here and the field of possibilities culturally and what we can learn about them through inquiring into these systems. Which doesn't mean that they're the same, but there are some things about them that are quite similar. So it's not the pursuit of the unlimited that I care about. It's the understanding of this relationship between the complexity of the world and the way we flatten, the artistic value of that flattening. Every artistic style is a flattening, right? And it's a flattening that talks to us. But also the problematic of that flattening when it becomes belief, myth, religion, cult, whatever. This relationship I feel is very important to the moment, and I will burn those couple of 100-watt light bulbs from time to time to explore that.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, I noticed kind of what I got from your talk was basically we're always chasing these marginal gains on these kind of arbitrary benchmarks in traditional machine learning discourse. And what I got is like as early as 1991, you were like, whatever we have available, whatever models are available, it's enough for art. Because the task isn't so well defined and because you have a lot of creative freedom over what you do with it. And now we're in a time where just like there's new models popping up all the time. Like if you refresh your page, there's a new thing on Hugging Face. And based on like what's happening in that regard and based on like focusing on these more specific benchmarks, how is that affecting your ability to use these models for your creative purposes?
I have 45 years of chasing the technological development, and I've seen lots of people fail miserably at it. There was a joke in the 90s when there's a lot of development of media art, especially in Europe. There's a lot of funding, and most of the funding of some of the institutes went into the time taken to adjust to every upgrade of the software or the new computers, right? It was really a self-defeating process. So at the time, I developed a methodology I call leapfrogging. So you just sit with one technology for long enough to be able to learn something about it, not just panic keep up with it. And then when something really significant that will really significantly offer you a new chance to learn something new or create in a way that feels important, then you jump and you invest the time again in that. And so this is running with Stable Diffusion 1.5 with a heavily modified version that we did to do this at the speed we do. But it's a model from 3 years ago. that we've just gotten really good at using, and also got good at prompting, got good at understanding how to play with it. So that's a leapfrog. I have not done, we've just started to do real time from video, 30 to 40 frame a second stuff with image generation, but it's still just a tool that we don't know how to use yet because we haven't invested the time. So finding the space to invest that time, ignoring some of those changes. I have my reading list in my browser is full of every model that comes out and that I never visit, that I never go to. It's only very rarely I go, okay, this is indicating to me something really starkly different. Like just being a little bit faster at doing something or being a little more expansive feels like, yes, it's just chasing after these edge cases. I'm more interested, in the lab, what we're working on right now is looking at motion capture and AI, because the absence of a relationship between the body and AI seems like something worth investigating. Maybe we don't want AI to know anything about our bodies, that's a possibility, but to understand what's involved in having a lot of the world operating with systems that have no body and have no experience of having a body feels a little complicated. So we're working a lot also with the question, with models we'll develop that are very small and not groundbreaking, about how you hold the exceptional and the unusual in these models that are highly statistically operative, so which tend to reinforce norms. So we're working with people with physical disabilities, with extraordinary dancers, who stretch the limits of what AI models trained on movement can do, to try to understand, is it impossible actually to embrace the rich diversity, the real full diversity of what we do as humans with a system like this? Is it really impossible? If so, we need to know that, and we need to declare it loudly. Or what techniques can we use to expand the space so that people are not edge cases? Right? So that it really does embrace not just a huge possibility space, but a really inclusive possibility space. Mm-hmm. So I don't have answers again, but I have ways we're trying to negotiate that complicated space.
Thank you. You're welcome. We have a question right here.
Hi. It's really amazing to see like the audio visual generating like in real time, because I did a little bit of research on some programs like Comfy UI, Stable Diffusion, connecting to Touch Designer, but I didn't see a lot like really nice outcomes. Either just has delays or like not happening in real time, and because I'm also kind of like just diving into this kind of like AI audio visual world, and I wonder, do you have any like really practical advice for like the starters like me to kind of follow the fast pace of this kind of like update of like AI, and also not like pain in the ass to learn the deep language of like the programs, whatever? Yeah.
There are lots more tools to work with AI than there have been in the past for working with other emerging technologies, but they do tend to reduce the scope of what you can do with them. They do not tend to be possible to use in real time, for example. We have prioritized real time in the work in my lab, partly because I work with performers, and it has to be in real time or it doesn't have any meaning. That has meant investment in larger GPUs that are expensive, but they're just high-level gamer GPUs, which make it possible to do things with Touch Designer, for example, and Stable Diffusion very quickly, but that's expensive, right? There is a cost thing. On the positive side, the capabilities are the speed of what you can do with a laptop or whatever are increasing, so that's a positive in terms of making it possible for an artist without a lot of resources to play around with them. But it is a problem. We're dealing with, again, the leapfrog method that I described is one thing. Get really good at one thing for a while and learn it, and learn how to work it to your way of, to what you want to express. The thing about any tool when you first approach it is it guides you more than you guide it. what it allows and what it doesn't allow shapes what you can do with it. And only when you've banged your head against that enough to go, wait a minute, it doesn't want me to do this, and I want to do that, that you bend the software to what you want, and you go through the pain of sometimes doing things the slow way because it's what you want, right? So creating the space where you can remember what you're trying to do with it and not getting swept away with what it makes easy is really important. So again, not a completely satisfying answer. I wish I could just say, here's the answer, you just do this. But what is expensive now will be cheaper tomorrow. What won't be cheaper is the time you take to really dwell in something and get to know it and get to ask really good questions about it. That's always going to have the same cost, your time, right?
We have a question back here, but just very quickly, a reminder that those of you who are joining us on Zoom, please feel free to activate the chat. We'll get those questions out as well. And a reminder that you can ask a question in any language you would like. This is a multilingual event.
Yes, you can talk to this also in any language you like.
Like, as a person who's like not like used to AI, like, I feel like this is like a pretty unique way of using it. So like I was wondering, like, do you see like a future where like there will be like more diverse ways of using AI within the art world?
I think it's inevitable that there will, but that requires on you and all the people in this room and people who will take it upon themselves. I'm not going to be here forever doing this stuff. I can only program so much. You thinking of different ways, of demanding, of imagining, I want to be able to do this, or I want to be able to ask this kind of question. I want to push this in a certain way. It's your desire to push these things that's going to make that diversity of things happen.
Okay. I also have like another question. Do you consider like technology like as like, do you consider technology like art, like, because like they're, because like I guess like when you think about it, like they're both like, I guess like both things that are like made from like well, I guess human like that are given like made from like humans and like have like, well, not really functionalities, but like are like just presented, and yeah.
The root term art came from a word meaning technology, basically. So if you trace back the etymology of art, they are actually very, very much joined at the beginning. I think it depends on the sort of question of efficiency and utility. Art making is rarely efficient and useful, and technology is usually guided towards being efficient and useful. Someone has written interestingly about the interdisciplinary nature of machine learning research and talked about the differences between what you do as an engineer and what you do as an artist. And an engineer tends to solve what are called well-defined problems with well-understood techniques towards a well-described end. Artists work with what are called ill-formed problems with unknown technique or unresolved techniques. It's what we do as artists is actually using sometimes the same materials is a kind of a stranger and more mysterious process of following our desires, our curiosity, to places that don't necessarily make sense, that we can't quite justify to anybody else, but that matter to us, that they bug us, they get into us, they irritate us or confuse us in a way that's compelling, and we pursue those against all the pain and frustration of getting certain software running or whatever to get to that point. But separately, I think it's interesting to note that technology itself is a product of human desire. Sometimes we think of technology as this thing that's separate from us. We want control over things. We invented technology to give us control. So it's interesting to think about technology as this sort of fruit of our very human desire for control or our fear of lack of control. So it's also a very interesting cultural space, technology itself.
Thank you.
This has been producing, no doubt, incredibly banal images as we talk about these philosophical questions.
There seems to be a big conversation about how AI art is maybe like not the best and that it might be displacing artists. What do you think about that?
I found myself wondering recently why, when I would come across a poem written by AI that seemed really, yeah, that seems pretty good, but I had no desire to read it. And I wasn't sure why. I don't know why I didn't. And I don't want to look at any of these images. I want to look at all of these images, but not any of them. None of them are in themselves particularly special. So it's a different thing, again, than what an artist does of making, not always, I mean, sometimes I don't make decisions because I make interactive artworks, but working from a very specific intent is something that makes, and what these systems do is they take the accumulation of culture and give you the patterns that already exist in culture, right? What we as artists, especially in states of frustration, do is we jump outside of the box of our already expectations and we find a new way to try to express what it is we do. If you look at the history, it's interesting to look at the history of the camera. When the camera was invented in the early 19th century, there was a panic amongst painters because the camera was taking away the traditional role of the painter as the visual memory of their culture. What happened, though, was the whole flowering of the complexities of pre-modern and modern, or not pre-modern, but like late 19th century and the flowering of modern art. Now, this is an optimistic perspective, and I don't necessarily believe, oh yeah, don't worry about it. This will just make us really creative in the future. It's not quite as simple as that, but it is important to see that one of the things this proposes is, well, this can do all these things. What is it bad at? How can I become good at what it's bad at? Or what is it that I want to do that it does really badly? This is a really important question.
I just have a follow-up question. It seems we kind of seem to be currently running ourselves into the ground with a lot of these technologies that we're making, and it might be like different from the camera in that the exponential consequences of using AI in a lot of different scenarios are just like maybe morally bad. Do you think there's something morally bad about using it for art?
I can think of ways to use it for art that would be morally bad, yes. I can think of making a lot of pictures in the style of a certain artist and selling them on the internet and flooding the zone with works that resemble that work. That's definitely bad. I think it would also be bad if what you're doing in working with the technology is losing track of what you care about actually as an artist. That's bad. Maybe not immoral, but it's bad. I do think, and again, I think there are so many different ways to approach this question. For me, I feel that with what I know how to do and what I care about, to explore this space is one of the best ways I can contribute to a positive outcome. That doesn't mean it's the right thing for anyone else. It means it's where I feel I can contribute best right now. And one of the most important things that we teach in my lab is that sometimes the right answer to how to use technology in something is not to use it. Totally, it's really important to understand when not to use technology. It's absolutely it's not always a good, it's often a distraction from what you really care about. So it's partly knowing yourself and what matters to you as an artist and producing out of that, whether it involves using AI or not. It's really important. So I think, in fact, AI is demanding from us to know ourselves better than we ever have had to before. It's forcing us to know ourselves in ways that nothing else has forced us to know ourselves. And it's really incumbent on us to take that challenge and understand what does matter to us. I could talk for another hour about that, so I'll have to I'll stop there because I felt myself about to veer off into a massive digression, so I won't go there. But it's a complicated question. Yeah. I seem to be saying that a lot. It's a complicated question. You have something to read, it looks like.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I do, but I also have a question.
Okay.
Are you open to that?
Absolutely.
Excellent. I think I'm gonna just this. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming all the way to Montreal. And
it was a long way.
And I have to say, your body of work is very impressive for someone in my position right now. involved in the creation of similar interactive system, and so it was incredibly insightful to have you here today. So I just want to reinforce the thank you here. And I wanted to circle back on your notion of latent spaces, because I think it's really relevant to the discussion you just had about AI art, because it seemed also that in your earlier works, the Giver of Name that you presented, it seemed to me that you were you were involved into like expanding basically this latent space, because there were no models available trained on huge data set, and it seemed like the artistic effort was put into the expanding a curational control that an artist may have, and it's funny to me to appreciate how, given the current technological context with the newer models, specifically with your ambient prompts, it seemed like you approached this system by maybe enforcing a type of curational authority there to make the thing aesthetic, right? It can be fun to interact with some basic styles in the background. So yeah, I just wondered if you could tell us a bit more about that tension between control and user or human autonomy in that type of system, and also how it can be approached as an educational system for AI. If, for example, we're not inclined to consider it as an art installation. So that was a big question, but I'm sure you have many thoughts on this, right?
Yeah, so starting at the last part of the question, yeah, one of the things that I've found most valuable in our research into AI stuff in the lab is the educational possibilities. I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of something we do in the lab. So we trained a large language model on the works of Shakespeare. And we trained the model also on song lyrics and hymns and all this sort of stuff. And then we project, so it will create plays in real time, so at the speed that you can read them or faster. And we project it up on the wall, and we get some incredible actors into the lab, and we get them to live perform the text that's coming out. Now, the text that's coming out is basically well-structured nonsense. It doesn't make sense over a long arc. It's not truly meaningful. What happens, though, in that context is that the performers, they're madly reading this text and delivering it, and that with a pause, a touch their nose or whatever, a gesture to someone else, they re-infuse this nonsense with meaning. And it's a really interesting, on many levels it's interesting, is it's also about what we do when we read the output of ChatGPT. We are also, so I know in French the actor is an interprète, an interpreter, right? Yeah. So when we read AI, are also interpreting. And to understand how we're interpreting it is really important. To understand what we bring to the table is something that I've found over and over again in my interactive pieces, that people do not understand that most of the intelligence they see in any system that they interact with is their own intelligence. Their interpretive ability to turn, we cannot help but find meaning in things. We cannot help it. And we don't recognize that this meaning making that we do instinctually is ours, not the system's. So learning that balance in itself is a hugely educational thing.
Exactly. I know Bart Simons was here. He's mentoring me on the development of something that's similar to that. And he's not fond of me thinking of it as a self-reflection kind of device where the exploration of the latent space you're doing basically is a kind of self-educating feedback loop, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, navigation is an important notion in this. Like, how can we explore the spaces hidden inside these models? And so this is voice navigation through a model. We've done all sorts of different ways of navigating because these spaces are vast and unfamiliar to us. We don't know how to digest them. And navigating, like navigating an unknown space, an unknown city, is a very useful way to get to know something about what's going on there. So these feel like very early strategies, actually. I mean, it feels so unsatisfactory, some of the things that I'm saying about what we're trying to do, because we're still trying to figure out how to, and sometimes why to.
Yeah, it's certainly in my position as a young graduate artist, researcher. It's difficult to assume the position of an artist to a system like that. So maybe I share some text that are related to my navigation.
Okay.
It's in French, but
that will
some
work.
part of in English too. So.
Okay.
Réciter, 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 réciter. Déguerpir de Joe Diagé un vendredi après le trafic. Prendre le vent de se redire que c'est beau la vie. Vendredi. Dormir à l'aval de l'autoroute. Puis rouler en AM. Au rythme de la musique. Suivre les contrées vertes qui ondulent. Laisse place à la verge d'or pour qu'elle se perde dans mes yeux. Que les conifères reprennent les terres afin de vivre de l'éphémère en temps réel. Il s'agit de se syntoniser avec un peu de flair. Mes rimes sont plates, mais derrière ce vallon, la mémoire recule mieux, on entend mieux. Mon cœur roucoule pour deux. Un écolier parmi les enfants à tête blanche. Les enfants à tête blanche. Eux et moi, on se rappelle comment c'était avant. Avant que je sois moi. Le gars sans loi ni de quoi passer le mois. On se sourit, on se lie de bienveillance, on se permet mutuellement d'être le nombril du monde. Le nombril du monde. Afin que tout un chacun se rebaptise à l'envers. À l'envers.
Thank you.
I also have a poem I'd like to read.
So I would just say leave longer pauses between phrases, because otherwise you get a huge prompt and it's trying to represent all of those at the same time.
Okay. My lips tingle so, nerves rooting from beneath the thin film of flesh. So sensitive, tender and red. They feel what my fingertips fail to delicately perceive. I often find myself grazing my lips along my arm hairs, feeling each and every blade of grass along my porcelain skin. Like a cow grazing in a meadow, the grass is rich and ripe. One could almost hear the bell clanging round my neck. Perhaps it is a way of self-soothing, a hug just for me, I pet myself with my symbol of love. Yet once I start, it's hard to stop. The cow never stops grazing.
So you can see how certain words suddenly, like pet, the word pet suddenly erupted into. AI likes dogs for a very specific reason. One of the earliest, most important training sets for training AI systems is called ImageNet. And they decided it would be a really cool challenge to put 400 different types of dogs in there and see if we could distinguish between them. So there is a huge portion of early AI systems that were dedicated to dogs. And so yes, it's very happy to make dogs. It's also happy to make cats. Little fluffy pussy cats jumping over streams, licking their owners, under a rainbow sky. Yeah, anyway. So there are things it wants to show and things that you have to work to get it show. Like, it's like being an artist, the things you can draw well and the things you can't. It's,
Yes? I would like some practical details on how to use the library that you installed. What's in the library?
So upstairs in the visualization studio, this is what we're seeing here. We have a live feed from there. So there's a microphone like this, and it's just a little more immediate and present for you. But it's this experience is what we have up there. Same.
Can we take it?
Oh, yes. Why don't you say, Anna?
So if you want to experience the piece, play with the piece, it's going to be open in the visualization room from 10:30 to 3:30 p.m. Yes, we'll be there. David will be there. Donc, si vous voulez expérimenter la pièce en français, mais c'est multilingue, hein, italien, espagnol, etc., coréen. C'est ouvert dans le studio de visualisation au 3e étage, dans la librairie. Je pense que c'est le 319, si je ne m'abuse. Et puis, c'est facile à trouver. Donc, de 10h30 à 15h30, nous serons là.
Est-ce qu'on peut comme enregistrer, taper ça puis avoir la copie?
Apportez votre téléphone.
Oui.
Voilà.
Anyone else have any questions? A poem? Anyone back here? Anyone on Zoom? Perfect, we have one back here.
Hi, just one question. I was looking up at the speed of a thought. It was like 500 milliseconds. How long does it take for it to be translated in the image as I'm saying something? And I don't know if you covered this at the beginning of the talk.
No, so this version, which is the multilingual one, is a little slower than the original version that was shown at Electra this summer, which was just in English, because we can use a smaller model that works faster, and it doesn't have to go through a translation phase. So there, it's updating 10 times a second, and then the images are updated, I think about 7 times a second. So there's about 180 milliseconds delay between saying something and when the image might turn up, but it depends on what else it's trying to generate. But so it's a fairly short period of time. But it's an interesting thing to think about this, what you said about speed of thought, and this is related to something I discovered, which I'll just share with you early on with Very Nervous System. I discovered that sometimes it would make sound when I thought I was just about to start moving but hadn't started moving. So I set up a scenario in Very Nervous System where I was like a gunslinger, standing still, but where the system was tuned to respond instantly with a sound. And then I would go to make a sound, and every time it would make a sound, as I made the decision, I'm going to go now, and like this, it felt like it was the sound was happening when the decision was being made, not when the movement was happening. And I thought, well, this is crazy. What do I make of this? This is a little too weird. And so I did some research and discovered that we estimate that consciousness lags our body movement by about 1/10 of a second. So because that system responded in 1/30th of a second, your movement would generate a sound which you would hear before you were aware you were making the movement itself. because it was a 30th of a second cycle, and then 2 more 30th of a second later, your brain would go, I'm in a move. But you'd already heard, because there's not so much of a delay in sound, you'd already heard the result. So this whole question of the speed of something, I've talked about slowness, but slowness and speed, you apply speed in different places than slowness. Slowness is powerful and speed is powerful, and you have to know what to do. So that was just leveraging off that notion of the speed of thought, which is, I think, to me, a fascinating question. Yes?
How good is it access? Scottish, Irish?
It does okay. I don't know. We did have a variety of Korean accents in Korea, and it seemed to do okay. The multilingual model is a model trained by OpenAI, we don't know what were there. You can find out what percentage of the data set that was used to train it is in different languages. You can see that the vast majority is English, and very low usage languages have very little in the data set, so its recognition is not going to be as good. But also, if the range of the data set covers more accents, etc., it will have better coverage. It does pretty well with accents. It does pretty well with Quebecois French, but your mileage may vary. I don't do so well with Quebecois French sometimes. So it will fake it. It will guess. It will go. It'll make. It's kind of fun to do that because it will just make garbage, gibberish, and sometimes we'll say profound things in the gibberish.
We may have time for one last question. Does anyone have any questions?
I will say something while we're waiting to see if some. I find it really interesting. I mean, one of the problems with AI development right now is, from an engineering framework, the easiest way to validate that your AI is working well is if it produces realistic images or human-like behavior, and that feels extremely limiting. It feels like that's like, okay, we're expecting very specific, narrow range of behaviors, and that there is a moment with these technologies before the engineers finally ratchet it down to being commercially viable, i.e. realistic and satisfying the average person, when there's true weirdness possible in a really rich and coherent way. And so one of the things we also try to do is make sure that we keep alive those models that happened at a certain point where the strangeness of them is visible. Because when you engineer out the strangeness, you're not really changing the nature of the actual model. You're just clamping down on the range of what it can do. And yet the unbridled model teaches you more about what the model actually is and what it does. So there's this very special space where the technology doesn't quite work that is creatively, for me, more interesting than the thing that will produce a perfect Hollywood blockbuster just from your description of a story, for example. Anyway, that was my... Well, are there any other questions?
I have a question that's sort of, it's not fully formed, and so hopefully that comes across as inhabiting the space of potential and not intellectual incompetence. But
excellent.
I guess I'm wondering a bit about how you see a spectrum or a lack thereof between pre-existing potential and then sort of abstraction as an artistic decision.
Pre-existing potential and abstraction.
Or like latent potential and abstraction as an artistic choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one of the things that they trained me in art school to think about was the space between the universal and the particular. It's not quite addressing the abstract, but and we're always navigating this space between those two. And I think I'm going to take a little digression before I find my way to get to answering your question. I'm fascinated. One of the things about the flattening that I was talking about is that it's related to that. As artists, we have our limited perspective on the world that we operate from. But we are kind of gesturing in our work towards some model of the world that we place ourselves in. And that model of the world, if we're idiosyncratic enough, and maybe a good enough artist, is a unique world model. And what compels people to come to our work is the particular way we navigate from the particular of who we are to this sense of something much, much larger that we're inside of. And I feel that a lot of what we experience as meaning in art is our sense of that tension, of that striving to place ourselves in a thing we cannot ever fully understand. Now, how exactly to place abstraction within that? Abstraction is an interesting construct that attempts to hold, it's almost like a way of holding, I don't know if it's a kind of flattening or a kind of way of, a kind of part of that in a way that's not particular, yet not all-encompassing. A sort of, a way of gesturing towards a sub-part of that field with a notion that holds the whole thing rather than the particulars. So it's sort of a way station between all of it and something. I don't know if that really addresses it, but I'm also have a lot of unformed thoughts about this, and what happens as we negotiate with each other from these spaces through abstraction. I think a lot also about theory and the use of words in theory as things that attempt to hold multidimensional concepts in a single word that we can share amongst each other and hope that each other understand. So theory being different again from abstraction, but sometimes involving abstraction. There's different levels and ways that we have strategized about holding and sharing information from the depth and breadth of our experience, and abstraction is one of those. So that's my hand-wavy response to your hand-wavy question.
I guess just as a last question to bring it all together, you brought up first dealing with a lot of these questions around agents and intelligence in the 90s, and I think that there's been a resurgence of a lot of the both scholarship and artistic questions that we've seen from, the extra relevance of like the cyborg or virtuality that's come up recently. And so I think being someone who was involved in that era of art, what is some sort of lesson that you really take into this next stage as we look back to the 90s? What do you think is something that's really important that we can learn and apply from that?
One thing I find myself thinking about, especially when addressing AIs, which are a certain kind of disembodied intelligence formed out of all these cultural artifacts, and that are about, let's just take a language model, that are about the probability of the way words go together. And then I think about how I speak when I don't really know what I want to say. And I realize that I basically speak like an AI because I'm following the probabilities of language when I do that. A simple example of how a language model works, which is looking at previous words and how to guess next words. If I say the word I went, the two words I went, all of you think, what next word? Say it out loud. I went to. Okay, that's most people thought to. I went to the grocery store. So you realize, like, I went to, there was very little possibility. Went to the, maybe, but then I went to, it opened out. So we are navigating, when we're speaking, this opening and closing of possibility space all the time. And when we don't know what we're going to say, we fall into the pure probability space and we start saying nonsense that sort of has coherence, which is very much like what an AI does. So there is a part of us that is pretty mechanical, our relationship to language, our relationship to lots of things. There's parts of us that are effectively mechanical in a way that's easily replicated by an AI. And the question is, what remains? Will we ultimately find that all of us are mechanical, or will we find that we are a delicate dialogue between the mechanical and something else? I don't know the answer, but I know that I like to think that we are a delicate balance between the mechanical and something else that I don't even have a name for, but I don't know. And one way of thinking of my work is as a way to keep testing that question. Find out as I simulate perception, simulate language generation, play with AI systems, that I understand more and more, or have a more and more precise sense of what this strange thing that isn't resolved into the mechanical yet, or at least we don't understand how it's resolved in the mechanical yet matters. And this tension between the mechanical part of ourselves and whatever else we can't describe that way feels like a really interesting place for thinking about models like this. And the larger question of, technologies. You know, the history of part of humans being turned into mechanical systems goes back well through the Industrial Revolution, where human power was turned into machine, right? Parts of us keep being calved off. The mechanical parts of us being turned into real mechanical systems. Separately, it should not be a surprise in contemporary culture that AI can do a pretty good job of doing a lot of the things we ask people to do. We've been asking people to do mechanical, repetitive, formulaic things, and suddenly we have a machine that's really good at doing that. We shouldn't be surprised that jobs are at a danger. We've been asking people to do things that are perfect to being replaced by AI. Rather than finding out what it is we have always done that is not easily replaceable by AI. We've been, you know, in a sense, that's become a term that's become very loaded recently about obeying in advance in terms of Trump and the US. We're kind of been obeying in advance to become systematized in a way that makes it easy for us to be bureaucratized into a mechanical system. So the tension between what these are and what we are is a really interesting contested space to explore. I don't know if I wandered way off your question, but anyway, that's
great. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone for setting all this up, too. And thank you for everyone who read and asked questions. Thank you.
David, thank you so much. Thank you for coming in. I really appreciate you coming into ForSpace. Thank you to the Applied AI Institute and also the Electra International Design Art Festival for bringing you here. Everyone joining us online, those of you joining us in the space, for your comments, your questions, your writing, again, thank you for that. This conversation remains available on our YouTube channel, so revisit it and reshare it. We're going to be closing up the Zoom in